Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Wednesday show of the Carolinas Weather Group. We are happy to have you joining us tonight. It is October the 7th. I guess, no, let's see. Is this the first Wednesday of October that we've had? I believe so.
Yes, it is.
It is. So our first October show. So welcome to the program tonight. Let's kind of give you an idea of what was going on. If you're tuning in for the Nor'easter show, we kind of had to delay that. Our guest, Dave Warren, who is a meteorologist up in Philadelphia, he actually is moving houses tonight, so had no connection to the internet. So we have postponed him to the end of the month, and so we had an open session today, and
October show. So
we're going to be talking about the Hurricane Joaquin and the upper level low, and all kinds of stuff that gave the Carolinas some rain last week. We thought that would be appropriate to kind of just give a rapid reaction of what we saw and the effects of it. So that's what we're going to be talking about tonight with Gary Stephenson from the Time Warner News Cable in Raleigh, North Carolina. We hope to have Partick Ellis join us as well, WECT meteorologist from Wilmington, North Carolina, to come on and talk about their effects down there in the eastern part of the state. So no real guideline to talk about reaction of tonight. We're just going to kind of go off of different topics, and I got this idea from Chris Michaels, who was not able to join us tonight, so we're going to be talking about that. But for that, I'm going to try to work with my earbuds here. I'm having some feedback. So I'm going to toss it over to Kid, let him kind of talk about what's been going on in the Charlotte area this week.
Thank you, Scotty. Most of the rain has moved out, or really all of the rain. Past 2 days has been nothing but blue skies, and it's been nice because it's been up in the 70s and near 80 today. Which is nice after that cold air damming event has finally peeled off. But I think at the university, our rain gauge up on the top of the roof of McHenry actually had a plug in it of some organic matter. And so a lot of the rain didn't actually get recorded. But at my house, we got about 3.5 inches from the total event. So Charlotte probably got a little less than that because it was just a little bit further north than my house. But it's looking like there might be a little bit of rain coming at the end of this week. Hopefully not for the race, but we'll see how that goes. I'll pass it on back to Scotty then.
Yeah, thank you, Kit. And yeah, we had around 4 to 6 inches here in the western part of North Carolina, just depending on where you lived. I've not mentioned Ricky Matthews, who was also affected by the rain up in the East Tennessee area. Ricky, how was the weather up there this weekend? And kind of talk to us about what's going on right now.
Yeah, we had a lot of downsloping come into play. The rain didn't really make it over the mountains too well. It tried, and it would reach the Boone area and Blowing Rock, where they got 10, I think actually the total was like 14 inches by the time the whole event was done in Blowing Rock, but it couldn't make it over the western side of the Appalachians, and so as a result, we ended up with about 2 inches or so in the Tri-Cities, and rainy-looking live shot on Saturday morning, but wasn't too exciting here, at least compared to some other spots.
Yes, and this time last week we did a big meteorologist meeting with several people around the state, and we thought Gary Stephenson was going to be in a canoe, a yacht. I don't know what else he could have used because the picture at the time was painting you guys to be under a couple of feet of water, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I tell you what, guys, I have never pulled for the Euro any harder than I pulled for the Euro solution last week. I mean, when we were talking last week, some of that main fetch of moisture, not even talking about the hurricane, looked like it was going to be coming across North Carolina. You know, models were seeing anywhere from 8 to 12 inches of rain, and bottom line, we in a lot of areas got less than 3 to 4 inches of rainfall area-wide. The Sandhills got a little bit more around the Fayetteville area, and of course Wilmington, southeastern North Carolina, got really hammered. I mean, on Friday, just north of Calabash, picking up 9 inches of rain, and then the fetch of moisture came back and got them late Sunday afternoon, Sunday night into Monday. And again, the southeastern part of North Carolina is really who got hammered in North Carolina. Had some problems, but I tell you what, like you guys were talking about, last week at this time, we thought we were going to be using canoes, boats, logs, anything that we could to stay afloat because it really looked bad.
Well, let's kind of take that approach now, Gary. What I was talking about earlier, Chris Michaels had a great post on his Facebook page about some things that he learned, and it kind of made our minds venture, and we're just going to talk a little bit about it. First of all, Gary, was the model output, like you were talking about, the Euro was keeping everything off the coast, but the GFS and several other models were at this time last week having Hurricane Joaquin coming into anywhere between the Outer Banks to the Wilmington area, and then those kind of started shifting out to the Atlantic as well. Let's talk about how we as a weather enterprise interpreted that model data and gave it out to the public, because there was some stations and media personalities that were kind of painting a bleak picture of us when the Euro was keeping everything out to the ocean.
Yeah, and Scotty, one of the things that gets really troublesome for forecasters and meteorologists is when you are looking at a situation like that, where the potential is there that you could have a significant weather event. It's a fine line between trying to inform the public and not panicking the public. I think all of us had it in our mind that the potential was there that we could see significant flooding followed by a hurricane, two separate entities, actually two separate weather events affecting the Carolinas, and that would be absolutely catastrophic. And when looking at the models that we were looking at last week at this time, more models were trying to steer that thing into the mid-Atlantic, and fewer models were trying to steer it away from the Atlantic, one of those, of course, being the Euro. Now, I will say this, the one thing that has kind of I've questioned about the GFS model is, of course, we had the upgrade this past winter on the model, and this is the first time, the first Atlantic hurricane season, that we've actually seen how the model performs. And overall, until this storm happened, I think it has done a fairly good job. There were several storms that dissipated long before they made their way across the Atlantic that the GFS picked up on. But I think in the back of meteorologists' minds, we're sitting there thinking, all right, is the GFS good? Is it locking in on this system? Is it telling us, because of that upgrade, that we are going to get a hurricane that's going to come rolling into North Carolina? And then we had the 2 or 3 forecasts from the Hurricane Center that actually had the track of the main center of the track coming across the northern Outer Banks of North Carolina. And then all of a sudden, right after that, the GFS ensemble shifted its track extremely, well, I won't say extremely eastward, but a good chunk eastward, and then all after that, we all kind of breathe a little bit of sigh of relief. But I think as meteorologists, that's what we were all looking at, and I think that's what had us worried last week was, is this GFS onto something? Is the Euro out to lunch? But again, it was another win for the Euro, and like I've said, guys, I am so happy that the Euro was right and this thing stayed away from us.
In terms of the accuracy of the two models, two things that really came to mind when talking about the accuracy or taking a look back and seeing how one performed over the other. It seemed like the GFS didn't really vary until it got that upper air data in, from the Hurricane Hunter GOES aircraft. And the other thing that someone pointed out on Twitter is actually, I just saw the tweet 1 second ago there, Alan Huffman, who runs the Raleigh weather account, said that to the best of his knowledge, the Euro model doesn't use vortex relocation. So for people who aren't big weather weenies, that's the center of the storm relocating it as the storm moves apart. But he said that other global models do, to his knowledge. So it was interesting to see if maybe it was picking up on something the GFS wasn't. So I guess, Scotty, the question really is, as we kind of continue to look at this, is, should we still continue to put all of our emphasis on one or take them all into account? Because we had, as Gary mentioned, so many numerical models saying that there was going to come ashore and just one that said it wasn't. How can you communicate a forecast like that in a situation where the majority rules?
Yeah, that's a good point, Ricky. And I want to kind of take this back to earlier this year where we saw the hurricane over the Caribbean, and each initiation, the hurricane track had it in one location, but the storm kept south of that track until it went over the mountainous chains down there in the island. So as a general, and as we bring in Patrick as well, who is covering the Wilmington area, how do you guys think our models have really, how have they fared this summer, especially with the tropical development, especially for you two guys who both forecast for the eastern part of the state, who is really prone to seeing those landfalling systems? Gary, I'll let you go first, and we'll let Patrick follow up.
Okay. I'm just trying to get my stuff together. Sorry I'm late, guys, by the way.
Okay. Well, you know, honestly, I believe the models have actually been fairly good as far as picking up development. Of course, we all know that if you look at a GFS run, at least once or twice every few days, at the end of the run, you're going to see some kind of tropical, catastrophic storm developing day 10, 11, 12, 13. But, I think overall the models have actually done pretty good as far as development goes. Of course, every time, there have been a few that haven't come into play. But I actually wanted to take this opportunity because when Ricky said something about the Euro being the only one that was kind of like the outlier on that easterly course, what storm does that sound like to you guys that the Euro did the exact same thing a couple of years ago?
Yes.
Sandy, exactly, Sandy. So, you're sitting there scratching your head on this GFS going, okay, we just upgraded this bad boy. What's going on? And Ricky may be right. It may have been that the upper air data needed to be put in there for everything to initialize properly to figure out where it was going. But if you remember, and I think Ricky and Scotty, I think you and I were talking about this on Facebook, there were reports when the GFS made that initial shift eastward that it didn't initialize properly. Somebody reported that it didn't initialize properly. But apparently something initialized right because it continued to stay on that course. I have to wonder too, and this is just speculation. I mean, I'm not a model meteorologist, but was the presence of two significant weather events within the same general location, was that kind of playing with the model as well? And again, that's just speculation on my part because sometimes you have to wonder, was the model kind of overwhelmed with everything that was kind of happening within that zone that it was trying to forecast for?
There was certainly a ton of energy with the upper level low, and did it really have a grasp on how much was there?
Yeah.
That's something, and it's part of our Foothills Weather Network, and that's something I posed in our chat was, how did the models do with those two strong systems? I mean, was it accurately depicting what was going to happen? Because in my mind, those two systems, one of them was getting shafted, and it seemed like the models were more depicted of what Joaquin was going to do than the upper level low, when in all reality the upper level low was the biggest story for our area, and Joaquin went on out to sea. So that's a good point that you raised there, Gary.
Yeah, I mean, and going back and actually giving the models the credit that are due, that fetch of moisture that it picked up coming off the upper level low, even a little bit of feed off the tropical system too. I mean, the models, other than it kind of shifting north and then coming back to the south, but when we were within a few days of the event, it pretty much set up and said that moisture was going to come across South Carolina around Charleston, head up into the Midlands, head toward Columbia. I think at that point, though, the biggest question was how far was that moisture going to get? If it got all the way into western North Carolina, then orographic lift came into play, and really, really bad things for western North Carolina was going to happen. So, as we got closer to the event within 3 or 4 days, I think we need to give the models some good credit because there was good consensus. The GFS did lock up on that moisture flow. I think rainfall totals, again, very questionable with events like this because they're statistical models. And if you don't see events like that often, there's not a lot for it to look back on. And I remember Dr. Brotak at UNC Asheville always telling me, record events, computer models do not handle them well. And I remember when Floyd came through, I think the estimates were 8 to 12 inches of rain, and there was a lot more rain than that when all was said and done. But generally speaking, whoever got that fetch everybody knew that they were going to have catastrophic flooding, and that's exactly what we've seen with this.
I want to bring in Patrick here. Patrick, you of all people, you're worried about the flooding that the models were picking up on. But at one time we were talking about Joaquin was eerily close to the Wilmington area. How did you guys go about there at WECT and forecasting that with the Euro plan, the outliers staying out to sea with all the other ones pointing that possibly the Wilmington area and your market there could be hit by that hurricane?
You know, it was a very interesting thing for us because we were having those conversations internally, like what's going to happen. I remember on, I guess it was Tuesday, I came in and we just started a 4 o'clock newscast, and I'm doing the 3 days a week on the 4 o'clock newscast. So I'm sitting there with our evening meteorologist Eric Davis, and I said, Eric, I don't know where we're going to go with this, especially in the latter portion of the week. We had kind of said that indirect impacts from Joaquin would be in our forecast. Now, not to say that it was going to be the actual storm, but surf, we had to start thinking about surf and erosion and things of that nature. We had to start thinking about the moisture feed, which I think by about Wednesday, we really had a good handle on, as Gary was saying, the models had really trended towards that heavy rain band, and really it was trying to figure out where that was going to set up. At one point, it was on top of Wilmington. For one couple runs, it was like eastern North Carolina, Greenville, up towards Morehead City. Then it shifted down south, and it kept kind of moving further and further down to the south. But for us, I don't think that we went gangbusters at any one point in time saying Joaquin was heading here, but the communication, because we started saying indirect impacts from Joaquin, from the surf, the moisture feed, people started to get that a little bit more muddled, and it made it seem like Joaquin was heading here. And even until like Saturday, we had people still asking us, like, what's the hurricane going to do? Is it going to hit us? Is it going to come right on top of us? We're like, no, we never said that. We said, indirect impacts, surf, erosion. It all plays into that, and just trying to explain the whole pattern. You really had like 3 players on the field. You had the upper low, you had Joaquin, you had the Quebec high pressure system up to the north that was funneling in all the wind. It was kind of hard to really explain to folks exactly what was going to end up happening. But I think in the grand scheme of things, because we actually just had a post-mortem today about the whole event at the station, I think our message was there, but how we communicated it, was it correct? Did we get it across to the people correctly? In our minds as meteorologists, we think so, but how does the general Joe Sixpack think that we got it across? So we started asking questions to them, like, do you think that we did a good job? And a couple of folks got back to me today, and they're like, no, y'all did a great job in trying to explain that the hurricane was not coming here. But sometimes you have to, hindsight's 20/20, but sometimes you start thinking about that. It's like, did I do a good job communicating that to the people? Meteorologically, I'm thinking of all the things that are happening, but did I actually do that? Do a good service to the people who are watching me?
Patrick, question: did you guys put the official NHC track on air?
We did, and we kind of said to them, especially that the one where it had Wilmington kind of in the cone on the edge. We explained to folks, like, still a very wide berth here of model, disparity here, discrepancies, and we're still trying to figure this out. I don't think at one point we actually went full on with models, though. I think we were just more so impact based, and from what we've learned with our consultants, gotta love them, talking about the impacts more so than the actual system itself. I think that kind of saved us, because we were talking about the impacts: rain, wind, surf. Don't worry about the hurricane, just worry about what's going to affect you. And if the hurricane starts to come our way, then we'll definitely have to give you the heads up. But I don't think we've changed the message any, even when we started talking about it starting on last Sunday, when we started seeing it form to the east of the Bahamas. We knew that the moisture was going to get pulled somewhere. We had the low that was in the Gulf of Mexico. We had the frontal boundary. So that was kind of the genesis point of it all. And then next thing you know, we've got upper low, we've got high to the north, we've got Joaquin becoming this monster storm, and we just never really changed the impacts. And I remember specifically telling somebody, you know, if we start seeing a consistent change of the models where it starts to change and starts heading heading west, we'll give you the heads up. But in the meantime, we're not going to change it because at this point there's just so much back and forth with the models. We saw how many GFS runs did we see go from out to sea to Jersey to Hampton Roads. You know, it went back and forth so many times, and then the Euro was just that steady state. It just stayed out to sea. But you have to think to yourself also, it's like all these models are saying Wilmington to I mean, even as far south as Myrtle Beach, all the way up to the Delmarva Peninsula, and you have the Euro just steady state out to sea. And I said to another meteorologist, Jonathan Wynn, up in New Bern, I said, Jonathan, he was thinking GFS was hinting at something. I said, well, the Euro's hinting at something too, because it wouldn't just be hanging out to sea if it didn't see something that nothing else is seeing at that point.
Yeah. My question, I guess, kind of groups back to that track, though. And when we put the track on air, and it's showing it going up in the Northeast for almost 2-3 days of forecast tracks, and that gets shared everywhere, you know, and most of the time we just kind of share that one static image, and that's the thing that seems to float around Facebook and Twitter the most. Do people understand that that forecast is still subject to change? Because I had a lot of people on Twitter that I saw saying, how did they possibly, you know, say it was going to go up there, and now all of a sudden it's going out to sea? They totally busted their forecast. They have no idea what they're doing, and the NHC needs to be fired. And it seems, you know, to us crazy for them to say that, but I can totally understand from a public standpoint how they kind of don't grasp that opinion, because we always think people focus on the line, and they do.
Yeah.
And they don't understand the whole kind of cone thing, in my opinion. And it makes me wonder if there's a better way for us to portray this kind of, you know, track forecast.
I don't think right now. Oh, well, Gary, go ahead. I've talked enough.
Well, I mean, my thing is, you know, there's no way, I think, because those forecasts are going to be updated 4 times a day. I did do the math right. It is 4 times a day, right? Those forecasts are
5 a.m., 5 p.m., 11, and 11. Yep.
Okay, 4 times a day. It's been a busy week. You know, I think that's why every time we post something like that, we put the time on it. Because it's interesting that you say that, because I've never had anyone come to me and go, National Hurricane Center doesn't know what the heck they're doing, because they keep changing the forecast. But that's really almost scary that you're getting responses like that, because that means right there that people don't quite understand what the Hurricane Center is doing, that they're taking totally new data every 6 hours, producing a forecast that hopefully is going to be a heck of a lot more accurate than the last forecast they gave. I think it's really amazing how we have come to a society. We've got all this information at our fingertips, and it's like that information is running headlong into a brick wall and just not getting out to people. And it's actually a little scary, because we can't get in everyone's faces and go, listen, this is a forecast. It might change. Kind of going back on what Patrick was saying about getting the information across about, you know, it was going to rain a lot no matter what happened last week. Very rarely, I mean, in my 27 years of doing this, I've never had 2 independent back-to-back systems potentially coming in on top of each other within a 72-hour period of time. So thankfully, that's something that we generally don't have to deal with all the time. But you can understand how the confusion there certainly takes place, because people see the hurricane, they see the rain, they associate it with the hurricane, so automatically we got a hurricane coming in. And about the only way to do that is to have 5 minutes for your weathercast and be able to tell everything that's going on with the stalled front and the low pressure area and the upper level low off the coast, and then show the track of the hurricane that's not coming to North Carolina. But
what's 5 minutes for a weathercast?
Pay attention. Do I, Patrick?
I said, what's 5 minutes for a weathercast?
Yeah, exactly.
I got 4 minutes, so.
You are a lucky person.
Yeah, we're 3:30 every day by default. So.
Well, listen, I didn't have 5 minutes, but I did. Let's see, I think we were in a 2-2-3, 2-2-3 situation. So yeah, I consider myself somewhat lucky. But that's it. I mean, we have to realize that people just almost need to be spoon-fed sometimes to completely understand a complex weather situation that's going on, and that's completely taken the nonsense that comes out of social media from people who don't know what they're talking about when they get involved, scaring the heck out of people that they don't need to be scaring the heck out of. But that's another can of worms.
We'll get to that topic, but while we're talking on the National Hurricane Center, I would like to mention, and you guys have seen this as well, they put in their discussion that this was a very fluid situation and not to really rely on anything right now because there were so many variables still in play.
And I think you had to really talk about that. I mean, if you didn't go on the air and say, guys, this is going to change, and it did so many times. If the storm had not continued southwest, I mean, where do you think we would have been if we, storm going right up the coast? If it would have been, Delmarva Peninsula, would have been New Jersey. There's a lot of questions there, and I think the Hurricane Center did a great job in really depicting their uncertainty. And the problem is that some people, if they look at that cone, we're just talking about the cone, some people think of that as the end-all be-all. They never look at the forecast discussion because the public's not going to look at that. We had to get that information out there that this was a very fluid situation, a very changeable forecast, and how it changed so many times. It was changing all the way up until it made the turn back to the northeast. I think that we have got to be the carriers of that message for the Hurricane Center, because the people who do consume the Hurricane Center's track, because a lot of people actually do know how to get to that web page to see that track. And all of our weather apps, I know on our weather app you can pull up the tropical tracks on our interactive radar. Explain if they look at that and say, oh, the track is now moving towards Wilmington. I've got to be the one that says, wait a second, let's talk about this for a second. The communication part has to be there, because again, looking at the image is one thing, but actually understanding the image, I don't think that people really are getting that. And again, that kind of goes back to what we were just talking about, the cone of uncertainty in the general sense.
But you mentioned a good point there with the discussions, is that it was kind of buried. Some of the hot points.
It was way at the bottom.
Yeah, way at the bottom. And I'm not hitting on the NHC for not being able to put this out, because I know they have different regulations and limitations they have to follow, and they kind of have a format they got to follow for the public advisories. But if we're trying to make a weather-ready nation, there needs to be an emphasis, in my opinion, on trying to change some of these things. Like when we put out a snow forecast or model graphic of snow, what do most of us put on there? Just a model, not an exact forecast, subject to change. Is that something we can put on an NHC forecast graphic and say, highly uncertain forecast? Because the cone itself is set statistically to where it's a certain amount of miles, no matter whether they've got high confidence going 100 miles east or 100 miles west. It can't change its depth and width. It just, in a world where people seem to look at things for 5 seconds, and that's about it, it makes me wonder what ways we can improve on that. And I know Scotty and Kit have a few different points, so maybe I'll just leave the thought at that, unless you two have any solid, responses with that. All right, Scotty.
Well, here's my question, and this is something I brought up to our group. This is the first major hurricane that we've had to deal with in several years. I think we had to go back to 2005. We did have Arthur last year, but I do believe that stayed at Cat 2. Do you think that this being the first big storm, and again, a lot of the national media outlets posing doom and gloom, do you think it really riled people up? Maybe it scared people, and they were more attent to saying, hey, this is showing it's going to hit the Virginia coastline or the North Carolina Outer Banks. Do you think maybe the fear of not having a hurricane this large out there in several years caused some of this hype cast that we saw last week?
Well, we can see Hypecast on just about anything. It's all about the rating. I think when you see the national news lead with 40 million people are in the path of this storm, well, it makes it sound like 40 million people are about to die. And when you see a Category 4, almost Category 5, this thing almost popped to a Category 5 when it made the turn, out there, and you've got a couple of forecasts from the Hurricane Center putting this thing right on the North Carolina coast. I think anybody who remembers Katrina all of a sudden goes, oh no, what if this thing does end up in here? And when you see a story like that, a weather story leading the national news, and then if you live in the state that is potentially impacted, and you see that in your local news, and then you go to the national news and you see that in the lead story, yeah, your level is going to of alertness, of scaredness, I don't know if that's a word or not, but anyhow, we'll make that up. It is going to increase. I'll be honest, as a meteorologist, knowing what we had potentially coming our way, if that storm had got into North Carolina, if you think it's bad in South Carolina now, it would have been, literally, catastrophic with a capital C. And to be honest with you guys, I did not sleep a lot last week until that system made the turn, until all those models started agreeing, because all I could think of was that storm getting into North Carolina. And if a trained meteorologist who's looking at all this information, who even saw the buried part about the uncertainty in the National Hurricane Center's forecast, is thinking like this, then the general public is starting to pick up on the same thing as well. Like I said earlier, it's a fine line between giving good information and not scaring the heck out of people when it comes to a situation like this. And we faced that last week with these two systems.
Most definitely, we were talking about that too. It was tough because sleeping was not a thing that I don't think any meteorologist in the state of North Carolina, South Carolina, even Virginia, when they were in the cone, they were probably freaking out as well. But I don't think I slept more than maybe 3 hours a night, because I'd get up and start looking at the model runs. It's like, did it change? It's like, did GFS turn around to the Euro? Did the Euro turn to the GFS? What's going on? And one thing that scared me a little bit, and we can maybe go down a rabbit hole with this one, but when I heard the governor try to make a comparison to Floyd, that's what people started to listen to, and I got so many questions about, is this going to be as bad as Floyd? Is this going to be as bad as Floyd? And you're having to say, it could. It could very well be. If the storm comes right on top of us, but what's the chances of that right now? I don't know. And this was like Thursday, when all of the models except the European were turning it into Morehead City. So you start thinking to yourself, like, well, what if we do have to, you have to start, all the gears start turning. What do we need to do as far as the station is concerned? Do we need to start, making preparations to move inland? Do we need to start making preparations for the station to stay on the air? Making preparations for the people, evacuating people. It's a big process. But when you heard those words coming out of Pat McCrory's mouth, Floyd, I think everybody's mouth dropped. And I heard it on our air once, and I kind of was like, whoa, wait a second, let's step back for a second, because we just still don't know. But it was a hair-raising couple of days, and I don't think until I got home on Monday afternoon, I don't think I actually sat down and just decompressed. This is maybe the first time I really just kind of decompressed since the whole thing. But it was a rough couple of days. Stressful couple of days. And I think every meteorologist in the state of North Carolina, every meteorologist in the state of South Carolina earned their paychecks this last couple of days with this storm system.
And you're talking about staying up, Patrick. Show of hands, everybody on. How many stayed up to 12:30, 1 o'clock in the morning, watching for the GFS to come in all last week?
It was like waiting for the new snowfall total map.
Yeah, exactly.
it even stinks whenever you're a morning meteorologist. So I mean, you're like, well, do I get up at 12 or do you get up at 2 o'clock? You know.
Well, and I was thinking this would have been a great week for the time change because then all the models would have come in an hour early, but can't be that way. But if you don't mind, Scotty, real fast, the comparison of Floyd, I mean, everybody picked up on that. But, generally speaking, in my personal opinion, what we would have ended up having if Joaquin had gotten up in here, it would have been more of a cross between Floyd and Fran, because Fran was more of a wind hurricane. Floyd was more of a flooding hurricane. And I think we would not have seen the significant amount of flooding, of course, that we saw with Floyd and Dennis. But with the saturated grounds, we'd have had a ton of trees coming down. So I think to be honest, if it had happened, I think we'd have been somewhere in the middle of those two storms, and it would have been really, 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 really bad. I don't think people in North Carolina, I know southeastern North Carolina got hit pretty hard with flooding, but I don't think people in North Carolina, the state, really realized how much of a bullet we dodged not getting that fetch of moisture that got South Carolina, and on top of that having a potentially Category 2, Category 3 hurricane roll in here behind that. I mean, that would have been historic. That would almost have been a biblical disaster.
And I think one of the GFS runs actually showed the hurricane coming onshore as like a Category 1, and the wind field expanded so much that it covered the entire state with like 60, 70 mile an hour gusts for a period of time as this thing kind of looped around the Piedmont and then finally lifted out. But that would have been just insane just to even think about that. But when we started seeing that moisture fetch start to edge further down to the south, I mean, at one point we were right on the hose, and even though we did get hosed here in Wilmington, I mean, I think we got close to almost 13 inches, and then just down in Brunswick County, closer to 15 inches. If we would have had what Columbia got, what Charleston got, I mean, this would have been a completely different story. I may not have had internet right now to get on here.
And I'm gonna take this kind of down the emergency management path. I was working with emergency management in Western North Carolina, and our GSP, our local weather forecast office, was talking about comparisons to 2004 with Francis and Ivan coming in with the heavy rainfall, and then we saw the model that Patrick was talking about where it comes in over Charlotte and kind of does a loop and then goes back out. And so there we are thinking of historic and significant catastrophic flooding from GSP, and then they're throwing in we could see 60 to 70 mile per hour wind gust. And just like you said, emergency management, we started debriefing with them on Wednesday, and throughout, they were getting everything ramped up because here we have to get National Guard in because of tree removal. We have to get shelters placed throughout the area. So it was a very tedious week. And like you both guys have said, if we did dodge a bullet, and I don't think people do realize how much devastation would be in the state of North Carolina right now if we would have had Joaquin come ashore, let alone with the rain. One thing that we had last week, we had 6 to 8, even 12 inches of rain with the first event that we had earlier a week and a half ago with upslope flow in some of the mountainous locations. So then you're looking at another 9 to 12 inches of rain, and we're just thinking, my gosh, this is, like Gary was saying, a biblical proportion. I mean, we could have seen some major devastation taking place in the western part of the state.
We were all building arcs back here. We were... The other part of this, because we had the east and northeast winds for, it seemed like 3 weeks straight. I mean, all the beaches are gone right now. I went down to Sunset Beach today. I mean, there were people just sitting on the beach just enjoying themselves like nothing had ever happened. But when I went to Surf City yesterday, I mean, you walk down the beach, there's escarpments about 7 feet tall on the beaches right now. We got pictures from Masonboro. We got pictures from north end of Wrightsville. I mean, the beaches took a huge hit, and it was not necessarily from the major storm system. Like, it was more so we had east and northeast winds for 3 weeks straight. We had the supermoon that added on to that as well. for about a week, and we had tidal flooding. We had people come up to us the other day and say, this is almost as bad. They said it's almost as bad as we actually had a hurricane come here, or tropical storm actually sit on top of us down at Carolina Beach. Carolina Beach was underwater for a good chunk of Monday, really Saturday all the way through Monday. People lost power. People lost internet. They probably still have internet issues down there. We had one lady who called me. She was livid at the fact that we were not wall to wall with our coverage. We were actually inside of that lull on late Saturday. She called the newsroom and she reamed me out because we were not wall to wall with coverage while it was sunny outside. I kid you not. The things that happen in a newsroom. But then Sunday morning rolled around, and we started seeing that band start to edge back north, and you start getting a little bit more nervous, and you start thinking to yourself, like, well, it's going to go bad, go downhill from here. I remember on Saturday saying, hey, guys, we're going to have sunshine today. I know it's raining right now. It was 9 o'clock in the morning. It's raining, but by the afternoon we had sunshine. We got up to 84. If we had not had that break on Saturday here, the rainwater flooding would have been pretty bad. We had Brunswick County was underwater still. They had a little bit of time to drain out, but if we had had about 24 to 36 hours of nonstop rain, like Myrtle Beach did, like Charleston did, like Columbia did, we would have been just as bad off as they were. But I think the thing that we really got hit with was the tidal flooding that a lot of people didn't really see because it was more so, not a lot of people were heading down to the beaches. They were more worried about what was going on inland. But definitely tidal flooding here locally was the big story, and we're still dealing with it today, actually.
And one thing that Scotty started to touch on earlier about the upslope flow in western North Carolina, McDowell County got a lot of rain in particular, and I know that I think it was Lake Tahoma was spilling over almost 2 feet, and a number of other lakes, and the Catawba River basin really was way past its banks and approaching, I think it was Francis levels is what they were saying, or they were worried that it might reach that. But one thing with all of that rain coming in, and then the Catawba River flows down into South Carolina, and where I live right next to the very start of Lake Wiley, and the past few months of drought has really lowered the lake level, and a bunch of sandbars have popped up. But since all of that rainwater was coming down from the mountains, all of the dams like at Lake Norman and Lake Wiley have started holding back the water and not releasing it to South Carolina. And since they've got all of the flooding down there, trying to let that drain out before we send even more floodwaters from the mountains. So is there anything that might happen like that in the Raleigh area or Wilmington area that would just add on to flooding even after the rain has been long gone?
We're actually in the middle of it right now. I went out to the Waccamaw River today, which drains from Lake Waccamaw in Columbus County all the way down into South Carolina. The Waccamaw River at Conway is going to be near, they're going to go into major flood. And I was out there in Columbus County in a small little area called Nakina, barely a blip on the map, and I went out there, and the water is just flowing across the road. This is actually the 4th highest crest of the Waccamaw River at that gauge location, and the last time that was this high, even close to this high, was Floyd. So I mean, like there are, I guess you could say that we're getting close to Floyd levels, but that was just the one river. All the other rivers, we've got the Northeast Cape Fear River. It's starting to crest right now up around Burgaw and Chinkapin, Duplin, and Pender counties. But the Cape Fear River had more so tidal issues going up and down each and every day. we were dealing with coastal flood warnings every single afternoon and until I think Monday or Tuesday. So that was another thing. But we haven't had like major issues. That's just the one river that flows out into South Carolina, which is not a good thing for them in South Carolina. Seeing how wide that flood basin was today, the river basin was today, and how far outside of the banks it was. I was 4 miles away from the actual river itself, and the water was still coming across people's roads and into people's yards. And that thing's just flowing down into South Carolina at full speed and continues to rise, actually. It has not stopped rising.
Wow, that is some flooding. I knew it was pretty bad down there, but I didn't know being 4 feet away from the center of the river and it's still flowing over. That's pretty insane. Guys, we're coming up on the 9 o'clock hour. Is there anything else, Gary, that you or Patrick would like to hit about with this event? One thing we haven't really talked about much was this was more due to the upper level low system than it was Hurricane Joaquin in the grand scheme of things.
As far as kicking it off, yeah, most definitely.
Yeah, I mean, that just goes to show you when you've got this low that's barely moving that you're going to have persistent weather, and this thing set up in such a way where it was giving that moisture feed into South Carolina. And that little low, it's hard to convey that to the public about what you're seeing coming in. This, you look and go, oh yeah, we got a cutoff low here, and they go, what? It's more sexy to say, yeah, we got a hurricane coming than we got a cutoff low coming. And but it's like many people have said, a storm system does not have to have a name to be catastrophic, to cause a lot of problems. To be honest with you guys, I never even mentioned the upper level low, the cutoff low on air. Never mentioned it on air because I felt like it was more advantageous to me to just say, listen, we got this flow of moisture coming in. That's what's going to cause the rain. That band is going to shift to the south over South Carolina. That's where the heaviest rainfall is. And oh, by the way, the hurricane's not coming to North Carolina. Because to be honest with you, to keep it simple, hopefully cause less confusion. Sometimes that's the case, sometimes it's not. But, again, in our lifetime, we may not see an event like this set up ever again. That's just how unusual I think it was.
I actually showed the cutoff low on Sunday. I said, Joaquin's over here. I showed the water vapor imagery. I said, Joaquin's way over here, but this is what you got to watch out for. With this system, I think that, again, communication is key, and really just getting to the public and explaining to them that this was not Joaquin. Though the moisture fetch. Did you guys see the weather bill image that Colbert used the other night?
Yes.
It's showing P-watts on national television at 11:30. That's nasty. Anyways, but you can actually see that precipitable water train coming off of Joaquin, and you're thinking in your mind, like, should I explain that where the moisture is coming from, or should I just say moisture's coming this way? It's a lot of it. Don't worry about where it's coming from. Or meteorologically, do you want to explain that it's coming off of Joaquin, but it's not actually Joaquin? It's actually this upper low that's forcing it and focusing it right on top of South Carolina. That's going to get railed with anywhere from 18 to 25 inches of rain. You go back and forth because the communicator in a broadcast meteorologist's mind is thinking, I've got to explain this in a way that a 5-year-old can understand it. The meteorologist, the scientist in you wants to geek out and say all these crazy things that people don't understand. I'm kind of with Gary on this. I mean, we had to say, Joaquin is here. There's a lot of moisture coming here. Don't worry about where it's coming from necessarily, but this is going to be serious. What you need to be understanding is that this is going to be serious. Somebody's getting railed with rain somewhere between Wilmington and Charleston. Seems that it was pretty much dead on that one. but explaining that to the people, that's the issue that we're running into. And when it comes to uncertainty, I think we've had the conversation about probabilistic and deterministic forecasting, and having a conversation about that with your viewers as well. Showing. I wish that my computer system, I won't say which one that we use, but it's the same one that Ricky and Gary use. I wish that we could show ensembles, just to be like, hey, here's the wide range of uncertainty, rather than me being locked into one particular computer run of one particular proprietary model, or the GFS, or just the Euro. I would love to be able to show you on these tracks, this is how wide this thing could actually be. Now, granted, we have the GFS ensembles, but at one point in time, they were all pointing at North Carolina too. So that was
Patrick. You don't want anything else? There's not a long list.
Let's see here. I would love for the resolution of the GFS and the Euro to be less than 100 kilometers.
Hang on, we only have 2 more minutes for this show.
I could go on and on about that particular weather system. I will say it.
So just one thing to just start wrapping things up here. There was one thing that was mentioned earlier, the Quebec high pressure that was sending all of this cold air wedge down south, which would have made for a perfect winter weather storm, but that's another story.
Don't even talk about snow. Don't talk about that.
But I'm reeling over the fact that I just had to go pick up my friend from getting his boat out of the water for the summer. So it kind of hurt me a little bit.
Yeah, October's rolling in. But my question is, like, what effects was that high pressure potentially going to have, like, with the wind coming in? We had that saturated water, or the saturated soil from all that water coming through. What effects did the wind have on the whole region?
Well, we even as the system was kind of winding up off of our coast, the wind advisories were going into effect. And to be honest with you, I don't remember in recent history a wind advisory being posted that lasted 72 hours. It was close to 72 hours, because I think initially it was issued on Friday into Sunday, and then it continued into Sunday evening, and then it got extended into Monday. But you got a pretty decent pressure gradient that's starting to set up. So we're not even dealing with a hurricane here. And here we've got wind issues with saturated grounds, where all of a sudden we got trees. I mean, in the Charlotte area, there was a tree that went through a house where a couple of people were actually in the house. And to be honest with you, I'm really surprised that we didn't get more power outages. We didn't get more structural damage from trees coming down, because we had some fairly decent wind gusts across the state, anywhere from 25, 30, 35, 40 miles per hour. So, that high certainly played a role when it came to setting us up for what could have been a bad situation. But like I said, I'm totally surprised as a meteorologist with the saturation of the ground that we did not see more tree issues with this event than we did.
I'm with you on that, actually. We actually got a wind gust report at Johnny Mercer's Pier, 61 miles an hour. So, I mean, we had some wind issues down here at the coast that, a little bit different for the inland areas. I think at worst, like Elizabethtown was closer to like 30 mile per hour gusts. And we got it told people it's like 15 to 30 mile per hour sustained winds, gusting probably up to about 45 at worst. And then when we got that report of 61 at Johnny Mercer's Pier, we're like, well, this is a little bit different. But that pressure gradient was definitely something. I think the pressure gradient was also modeled fairly well, even without Joaquin being there. The pressure gradient was there. Every time that even the GFS or the European showed this thing going offshore, or kind of going straight up and paralleling the coast, the pressure gradient was always there across the Carolinas. I think we started talking about wind issues probably as early as probably Wednesday or Thursday. I mean, kind of when the rain events started to show up and become more prominent in the forecast, more so than Joaquin.
Right, and I remember, like, even before the wind advisory was even sent out on Friday. It was Thursday night, and I saw a tree down in Belmont, and that was before we'd gotten the additional rain from the upper level low.
All right, guys. Well, we're a little bit after 9 o'clock, so Ricky, do you have anything that you want to kind of close up with?
No, I think we've covered all of it pretty well. I'm glad my house is still standing in Hampton Roads, and I think Patrick and Gary are probably pretty happy that it didn't impact us directly.
I'd still be at the station.
I would be in New Bern helping our sister station. So.
Patrick, Gary, do you guys have anything you want to kind of hit on as we close up the show?
Just one quick thing that, like with every weather event, man, trust the meteorologist. We're watching everything. Watch the National Weather Service. We're playing off them when they issue warnings and advisories. Hurricane Center, they got all the data. They got a tremendous job that they've got to do when they're issuing forecasts, because there were people sweating bullets when they said, we got to make this forecast go toward North Carolina, because they knew at that point that there was a lot of emergency managers and town officials and stuff like that, and state officials that were under the gun right then to start making critical decisions. But watch what you watch on Facebook, watch what you watch on Twitter. Get good information from the meteorologist and the weather community that you trust, and they're not going to lead you wrong.
I definitely agree with that. I mean, when you look at, we were all sitting there hitting F5 on our browsers every time a Hurricane Center track was coming out, a new forecast discussion was coming out, because we wanted to see how they were going to react to a swing in the models. Those guys had a very tough job, and they do have a very tough job because people rely on them so much, and it's probably the most recognized thing that you see during tropical season is that cone. And if you don't see the cone, then if it's not affecting me, then it doesn't worry. But those guys had a tough job, especially with the fact that you've got one of the, I hate to say it right now, it's like one of the most reliable models that we've got, the European saying it's going out to sea, and then you've got all the other models fighting against it saying it's going into the coastline. And I know they were probably sitting there like, what do we do? I mean, we're literally going like this on the models. Those guys had a very tough job, and especially when we're dealing with trying to talk to the EMs, talk to the local officials, and try to communicate to them as well as far as impacts that were going to make people evacuate, make people, schools being called out, and a lot of money having going into that as well. They had a tough job, and the EMs rely on them. They listen to us, but they rely on the Weather Service, the local offices, the Hurricane Center. So kudos to the guys at the Hurricane Center, kudos to the guys at the local offices that had to issue all the warnings. And for us TV guys, we were putting in the long hours too to communicate what they were putting out on the television side, because again, television is still a medium that people get their information from, even though that we think that social media is the way to go right now. It seems like it in some instances, but TV is still the way that many people get their severe weather information. And we were sitting there freaking out just as much as the guys at the Weather Service and the Hurricane Center too.
I will say this though, guys, the most ironic thing about this whole event, I think, was the night. I think it was the 11 o'clock forecast, and I think it was Wednesday or Thursday's 11 o'clock forecast when the Hurricane Center put the center line of the track from Joaquin on the northern Outer Banks. The very next GFS model run, which came down an hour and a half later, made that eastward shift. So that has got to be the most ironic thing of this whole event right there. As soon as the forecast came that it was going to come to North Carolina, we saw the GFS shift to the east. So it was like psyching with us. It's like, I'm going to go with the GFS, but I'm going to psych with you. I'm going to go with the Euro. But anyway, I thought that was the most ironic thing from the entire event right there.
Well, it was a very very interesting event to cover, and I'm sure something we'll be talking about for years on to come as case studies of model data. One thing I would like to mention, we are going to do a special show, special show on the South Carolina flooding with some of our meteorologist friends in South Carolina. We're going to kind of let the situation down there get a little bit better before we bring those guys on and let them get some rest. But I'll be looking sometime at the end of November, early December. We're going to be having some guys on from South Carolina kind of talk about their perspective of the storm and do one of our special events like we've done in the past. So Gary and Patrick, we appreciate you guys coming on tonight and sharing your thoughts on the situation, and we'd love, we were just talking about social media, love for you guys to talk about your social media outlets and how our followers and viewers can get a hold of you. I'll start with Patrick down east.
You can get with me on the Twitters at Partick Ellis WX, and on the Facebooks Partick Ellis Meteorologist.
Gary, I saved you for last because you always have to remember what your Twitter account is.
Well, I always have to pull it up and read it on the screen. I mean, that shows you how old school I am. But like Patrick said, on the Facebook, it's Chief Meteorologist Gary Stephenson, and on Twitter, as soon as I look it up, it is G Stephenson _WX for weather. That's really sad that I have to look that up all the time, isn't it?
We'll get you next time. We'll put your Twitter account down here in your little scroll down here, so you don't have to look it up next time.
Well, I appreciate that.
All right, guys. Well, we appreciate your insight tonight, and as always, love to have you guys on, and hopefully to have you back on sooner rather than later. Next week, we're going to be talking about how the weather affects fall leaves, the colors as you head up into the mountains and look at all the fall foliage. We're going to talk with Mr. Jim Duthie out of Boise, Idaho, a meteorologist out there. He's going to be talking to us about leaf colors and fall and the weather and how all that plays into fact. I don't know much about it, so I'm interested to find out some of the ins and outs on that. And then after that, we are talking with Mr. Brian Busby, who we had to kind of push off to the side last week with the weather impending last week. So Brian's going to be joining us on the 21st, and then the 28th we're going to be talking about nor'easters with Dave Warren out of Philadelphia. And November 4th is Larry Cosgrove. He's going to be talking to us about his winter outlook. So a full slate of shows coming up, and we hope that you have enjoyed tonight. As always, follow us on Twitter and Facebook, and make sure that you download our podcast. I'm sure Ricky will have those up in the next day or two, and I think he's already left, so WCYB Ricky is how you can follow him on Twitter, and so we always look forward to seeing you guys, and we'll see you next week. Kit, I'll let you go ahead and end the show.